Welcome to this launch of the U.S.-Europe Sanctions Coalition. This is an interparliamentary effort to build up more sanctions and fill in the loopholes of those Russian oligarchs and other proxies who have not been sanctioned in the really, actually quite powerful G7 effort to hold Russia accountable for its full-scale invasion, its genocide in Ukraine. So sanctions have been an absolutely critical part of this effort. Of course, we have to get weapons to Ukraine. That is number one. We have to ensure that support goes to Ukraine, but we also need sanctions. That is to say, we need to starve the Russian economy. We need to reduce Russia's capacity to kill, to commit this genocide. And though we started out very strong after February 24th, after the initial invasion, we've really seemed to have tapered off. So initially, in the first few weeks, we saw an almost unprecedented effort, particularly from the EU, in fact. The United States actually followed a little bit the EU. One of the most impressive efforts in taking down a large section of Russian oligarchs, elites, proxies, members of the Duma, members of the Federal Council, freezing Russian reserves, one of the most extraordinary forms of sanctions, freezing just straight up this 300 billion Russian war chest in euros and dollars, an almost unprecedented kind of sanction, freezing Russian financial system, sadly leaving energy open, which let us, enabled Russia to continue making money for quite some time. So there was an initial talk about a coal ban, which was in place pretty quickly, but then gas remained to be bought for quite some time until finally it was Russia, in fact, that cut off the gas in an effort to try to freeze out the EU. And then, of course, now we have the oil cap. That's the most recent thing, although the oil cap is much higher than where we're currently trading. So, in fact, it's currently having no effect. Since then, there's really been no individualized sanctions, or very few on a handful of mid-level individuals. We really need to see more of this. And in that effort, we have members from 5 different countries on the line right now, led by Representative Steve Cohen of the Helsinki Commission. He's co-chair of the Helsinki Commission. And then, of course, Ukrainian MP Alexei Goncharenko, who have been putting together these letters with our partners around the world to pinpoint individuals that need to still be sanctioned. And I mean, some of these individuals are truly conspicuous by their absence. One, of course, is the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, who still is not sanctioned by the United States, despite being sanctioned by the UK, and having all of his various assets around the world investigated, and all these sorts of articles and in fact identifying where his assets are, sort of 10 billion in the Caymans, 10 billion in BVI, and so on and so forth, the various hedge funds, and yet we still don't have the sanctions on him. So that's one example of the kind of individual we're trying to target here, trying to close the gaps and loopholes that have sprung up in this sanctions network. And really, there could be the primary reason for this could just be that we need to do so many different things in order to ensure that Russia is unable to wage this unprecedented, illegal, brutal war of aggression. So I want to introduce sort of the 5 lawmakers going to have speak today. They're going to go in the order of USA, Ukraine, UK, Poland, Estonia. So we're first going to hear from Representative Steve Cohen. He is the co-chair of the Helsinki Commission, and he's been the leader of these efforts, along with second Ukrainian Parliament MP Alexei Goncharenko. And then we're going to hear from our good friend Bob Seeley of the UK Parliament. We're then going to hear from Arkadiusz Mularczyk, the Polish Deputy Foreign Minister, also an MP, given how the system works. And then finally, we're going to hear from Estonian MP Eric Kross. So together, these individuals have already put together 2 powerful letters identifying individuals, including Steven Seagal and Roman Abramovich, but many others who have yet to be sanctioned, who still are falling through the gaps of our sanctions framework. And then we hope we'll be continuing to put these together and have others join in this effort as we try to push and help our executive branches and governments identify the individuals that have yet to be sanctioned. So with that, I want to hand the floor to Representative Steve Cohen.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for all your work on this issue. You've certainly been wonderful staffer for us and an effort all over the world to help Ukraine. This is part of Russia's hybrid war on the world, not just on Ukraine, which obviously it is, but also on the world through the oligarchs who have taken over, taken all the Russian assets or much of the Russian assets to their own personal benefit. Putin claims that Ukraine historically doesn't exist, and he goes back to Peter the Great, and he goes back to all these different historical characters and conjures up the idea that Ukraine never existed. It's just part of Russia. But the truth is, Russia never doesn't exist. It's simply the Soviet Union broken up and stolen by some individuals and the oligarchs who've taken all the assets, ripped it off from the people, and Russia does not exist. There's not a Russian country. There's a sham government, a sham group that has stolen all those assets. And we need to put sanctions on those people to stop them from warring on Ukraine and from eventually warring on all of the Western world, which is what Putin would do otherwise. He has sanctions have worked, but they need to work more. The fact that Abramovich hasn't been sanctioned by the United States is appalling to me. I've encouraged it for a long time. He's obviously involved, and I think he's probably made some people in our State Department, I'm guessing, I have no knowledge of what he's done or what's said, made him think that he's kind of a good asset, that he's helping, he was allegedly gonna bring about peace because he hadn't done any of that. I think he's just doing whatever he can to keep his assets. And he's kept his ass in good shape. And he's done Seagal the same thing. He was over there in the hospitals testifying as to who was responsible for shooting up that prison. He had no knowledge. He didn't know anything. He's a false guy too. He's a Hollywood creation of a macho man. He's not a macho man. He's on his knees to Putin and on knees to everybody to make money. And he needs to be sanctioned as well. Sanctions do work, but they need to be improved upon. Russian oligarchs have kind of had a mea culpa. The only reason they've had any kind of a mea culpa is because of the sanctions. It's the money that makes them matter. Money matters to them. They say it's not the money, it's the money. Russians are losing hundreds of billions of dollars on a regular basis. The budget in Russia, the GDP is falling, standard of living is falling. Russian people noticing that all because of sanctions. As the Russian people have to bring down Putin eventually, he has to be lowered in the eyes of the Russians to where he'll resign or not to have the strength that he has. And that's going to come through with Russian people suffering. And they have suffered with all the money put into the war machine and the people lost. Those are all losses to the Russian people that Putin has used. And if they also have to help with reparations and rebuild Ukraine, which would be close to $1 trillion deal, have their monies that we have in banks frozen, taken and used for that purpose, that'll hurt the Russian people too. But the Russians have been hurt by all the missiles and all the money's going into the war machine and not into the human machine. So we need to strike at Putin's entourage and lower his esteem with the Russian people. And I think that's happening. And we need to remember, I'm big on history, so I remember Bill Browder today, Mr. Seeley. Bill Browder with the Magnitsky law is kind of the beginning of sanctions, start of sanctions. He's right there at the beginning. And then my friend and our friend, Kara Mirza, who, like Navalny, and so many other political prisoners, have been taken by Russia because of their heroism in going back to fight for a free Russian state. So the USA and the European Union, Britain, and Ukraine as countries in the European Union, Britain and the European Union, all impose sanctions against Putin. But sometimes the situation looks disorganized and incongruent, unfortunately. So we need to do more to make that not the case. The EU will impose sanctions while Britain and the US will not on certain occasions. This we've seen with Abramovich and others. And that's why we're launching this coalition to bring together the parliamentarians of the USA, the European Union, Ukraine, and Great Britain to synchronize our efforts. We will no longer have a haven for Russia's corrupt and Putin's elite. And we've seen these yachts around the world that have been taken, but we haven't been finish up the job. But they've got them. The monies they've got are just, and it's hard to talk about in a way that the oligarchs and all the money they've got, which they do, it's in my opinion, unbelievable and obscene. But then Bezos is pretty wealthy, and Musk with his rockets and Twitter. He's an evil person too. He's right there with Putin and Trump. Uh, Dangerous to the free world. Our group has written letters to Secretary Blinken and the High Representative of the European Union, Mr. Borrell, called to impose sanctions as soon as possible. As many Russians were involved in the war in Ukraine. Abramovich, Vladimir Patanin, Vladimir Lysin, and they're some of the richest Russians who don't have sanctions imposed on them yet. They're all on the Forbes list, and they support Russia's war against Ukraine with their money and their businesses, both overtly and covertly. Putin uses them as his wallet, and we must do everything we can to ensure that there's not even a single penny in his wallet. Putin's the enemy. Putin's the problem. Putin is the Hitler of the 21st century. We must unite to stop him because he will not stop without our efforts. So thank you very much for this call and for your support, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Repco. And I want to emphasize a point that you said about the confiscation of assets. I mean, we also, I think this group wants to keep its eye on enabling that confiscation. Absolutely one of the most important initiatives to take Russia's reserves, to take oligarch money, and to give it to Ukraine to ensure that, Russia pays for the war. And I know that that's something you've done a lot of legislation on, and thank you for that. MP Goncharenko.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank U.S. Congress Helsinki Commission, Representative Cohen and Representative Wilson, and great engine of our work, Paul Massaro, for all work you are doing in support of Ukraine before February 24 and especially after February 24. And I think today we're making a new, very important step in this direction. First, it's clear that the situation with the sanctions is very important. Sanctions do work, they really work, but unfortunately there are still loops in the sanctions, and so we need to fill these loops. And also there is a problem of desynchronization because United States of America has its own list of sanctioned persons, United Kingdom its own, European Union its own, Ukraine its own. And certainly it's the problem. So they should be synchronized, not to give any possibility for such people like Abramovich mentioned today, Lysin, I don't know, Kirkorov and other people who can just avoid the sanctions because they're in one jurisdiction but not in other. So it's something which should be changed. So we created such platform in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and I'm very thankful to my colleagues Arkadiusz Mularczyk and Eric Cross and others with whom we started it. Then now we are making a real US-Europe coalition with involvement of US congressmen and United Kingdom MP. That's very important. In our next letters, we will also address the Foreign Secretary cleverly because the United Kingdom is very important in this work. We know this. We will continue our job. I am sure that we will have results in this. For sure, it's not only about sanctions, but about freezing the assets and seizing of these assets in benefit of reconstruction of Ukraine, because it's not American taxpayers, it's not British, Polish, Estonian, Lithuanian taxpayers who should pay for this, but for what was done by Russia in Ukraine. But it is Russian oligarchs, entourage of Putin, all his wallets, his propagandists, and other malign agents who did this and who should pay for this. Also, in our coalition, we have member of European Parliament, member of Foreign Affairs Committee, Lithuanian Petras Auštrevičius. Unfortunately, today he would not speak. He just doesn't have this possibility. But it's very important that European Parliament is also in our coalition. There are a lot of to do. We need to work on Russian metallurgy because they're still selling their goods to Europe. The same people who are producing Russian tanks and missiles. We need to work on Rosatom, a very big Russian industry, which is not still under sanctions. It is also something which should be changed. And in general, we should say, no safe haven, the great name of our meeting. The free world should not be the safe haven for Russian dirty money, for Russian malign agents, for criminals who are responsible for genocide in Ukraine, for killings in the United Kingdom, Czech Republic, Georgia, Syria, Africa, and all over the planet. So thank you very much, colleagues, and I'm sure that our work will be a very useful and practical step in order for free world to win this war. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Mr. Goncharenko. And I think it's sort of no wonder that we have here the United States, Ukraine, Poland, and the UK, seeing as when one goes back to even February 24th and shortly before, these were the countries that were really on the ball, knew it was coming, were preparing Ukrainian defense, and since then have been some of the most proactive. And that's why I want to hand the floor now to MP Bob Seeley, who's been a real champion around this stuff and sort of a personal friend of the commission. So, MP Seeley, please.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I hope you can hear me okay. I apologise about my darkened room. We have a bit of a power cut in my bit of parliament at the moment. It's I can't blame President Putin, but it's the Victorian electricity system, which is unfortunately letting us down. So I've got no heating and no electricity. I feel like I should be in Odessa, but I'm actually in London. Right. Thank you firstly to Congressman Cohen. Thank you to you, Paul. And above all, I think thanks to Alexei Goncharenko for this brilliant initiative and idea. And I think it's a really important one. And we all need to be working together. Russia is a massive threat to the international system. It's a threat to the finance system, to the global system of treaties, to peace in Eastern Europe, and in fact, peace throughout the world, as we know. Britain did move quickly to sanction people at the beginning of this war. It is also true to say that London was way too friendly to questionable Russian money as it flowed via some, frankly, corrupt banks through the city of London, through other places into tax havens in the Caribbean and elsewhere. Sanctions are working, but as Alexei and indeed Congressman Cohen said, the problem is with sanctions is that they're not synchronized. And I think that's something that we can be doing by writing letters to not only Secretary of State Blinken, but also Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, our Prime Minister here, to ask why, if people like, if you have major players sanctioned in the European Union but not in the UK, why? And if you have major players sanctioned in the UK and the European Union but not in the US, why is that? And we have to bring that pressure to bear. I think cooperation is now absolutely vital, and we have to close those loopholes for Putin's allies and indeed Putin's money to hide. As I say, a number of loopholes currently threaten to undermine sanctions. I think one of the most interesting things with me is that as this war evolves, Russian tactics evolve. So one of the problems that we're facing is that Russia is outsourcing some of its machine tool parts and machine tool factories to places like Armenia and Uzbekistan, which become more difficult to sanction. Also, apparently the importation of washing machines and refrigerators is going up very sharply from some countries into Russia, because Russia then strips out those those white goods, takes them to pieces, and uses the electronics in them for missiles and other military components. So we need to get wise and smart to what is happening, and not only be systematically and comprehensively sanctioning individuals, but also understand how Russia is gaming the system in order to keep the flow of funds going by selling oil to non-Western countries, and then that oil finding its way into the Western markets, but also to see what is happening with sales of civilian equipment that then gets stripped out and used for military purposes. So, as with all these things, information sharing is vital. Cooperation between Congress and Parliament and the parliaments of the European Union, and very specifically the parliament in Ukraine, the Verkhovna Rada, is critical to our success. But this is a very good start. What we need to do is now widen the group that we are, to get more people involved from more countries, more states, more parliaments, to make sure that we act in unison to get this working. But thank you to you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seeley, and thanks for highlighting the export controls. That was another one of, I think, the really enormous and interesting innovations around the way that we initially responded, and in one sense will be the most powerful long-term sanction if we can actually hold to it, because it does prevent the rebuild up of the Russian military machine. So finally, we have MP, Deputy Foreign Minister of Poland, Mularczyk. So please.
Thank you, Paul, and dear colleagues. I would like to thank the Helsinki Commission and our colleagues for the invitation to speak at this meeting. Let me start by saying Poland strongly supports and will continue to support Ukraine and its attempts to repel the Russian aggression and in hosting 3.5 million Ukrainian citizens. Poland also provides direct and multidimensional support assistance to Ukraine. Poland is happy to be one of the biggest supporters of Ukraine, a country fighting not only for their freedom, but also for Poland and Europe freedom. The aggression we see in Ukraine now is something that also lives in our recent memories, our Polish memories. Until today, in Poland, we have been discussing justice for the Second World War and the unresolved issue of reparation, a topic that will be increasingly relevant for Ukraine in the future. Our current work, which led to our Second World War report, will also prove vulnerable for Ukraine in the near future. The US and Europe are living in a moment of a strategical geopolitical change. This is something that everyone should understand. The West must bring a strategic defeat for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The EU and US must take steps to isolate Russia internationally, impose restrictive measures against the Russian economy, target third countries involved in the war, including Iran and Belarus, continue supporting the Ukrainian people, ensure accountability for violations of international law and war crimes, and work closely within NATO and cooperate with other allies worldwide. We need to keep adopting further measures to increase our pressure and weaken the war machine. Additional sectoral sanctions shall include new exports ban on ICT sector products and services and further businesses services ban. Moreover, we will have to adjust the oil price cap in order to further diminish Moscow's revenue and respond to market developments. We shall also agree on a new individual listing on oligarchs, Russian military industry companies, Kremlin's propaganda machine, and top commanders of the Russian armed forces. Also, we have to take steps in order to battle the circumvention of Western sanctions. I'm encouraged that the use of such fora like a Helsinki Commission that allows politicians from Europe, the US, the UK, Poland, and from the part of our Europe to meet and discuss such difficult topics and forge a way forward. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you also for highlighting Iran and Belarus. It's really critical that we keep these sort of states in mind that have been, I mean, in Belarus's case, straight occupied, you know, almost an extension of the Russian Empire at this point, and Iran, which has been an enormous spoiler and supporter of Russia. So I think that when we think of how we sanction and how we, you know, cut off these states that are helping the Russian genocide effort, that's something we really need to focus on. So thank you so very much to our lawmakers here. The US-Europe Coalition on Russia Sanctions is hereby established. And we're really looking forward to further letters and further work on this stuff. So with that, we're going to close. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.